Welcome back. I hope you had a great lunch. We're here with the next session is going to be a presentation with the FAA. They're going to be providing us an update. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this session, HDR. FAA, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. This is Dave with the FAA Dakota, Minnesota Airport District Office. We're here to bring some topics to you this afternoon. So we're going to start out with Rebecca McPherson. Rebecca is the regional administrator for the Great Lakes region.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad you could join us, and I'm so glad that we can be here together. It's been a long year since our last conference, and I wanted to focus today on sharing information with you on how the FAA has been continuing to be able to support you all during the past year, and in some instances, and I know this is a sore point, and that's why I really want to do most of my presentation on this, ways in which we haven't been able to support you, and sort of the impact on that, and really some help that we're asking for on your part. But first, let's look a little bit at how the towers have been doing and how the FAA has reacted from an air traffic control perspective. In April, the FAA went out and ended up reducing the hours at several of the towers across the United States, including two in North Dakota, Grand Forks and Bismarck. And the reason that we reduced the tower operating hours was because we needed to figure out a way to segregate tower personnel. And that was largely dependent on how many controllers we have at a given tower. So at big airports like O'Hare, Detroit, Minneapolis, we were actually able to segregate entire teams of controllers. And so we'd have an A team and a B team. For a while there, we had an A, B, and a C team at O'Hare. And what that allowed us to do was to create pods of controllers who really sort of traveled together, much like they have talked about at different schools, so that if we had a problem, we could pull out that entire pod. We'd actually have them work until the end of their time period, pull them out, do a level 3 cleaning, put them in quarantine if we needed to, and then bring on the next group of individuals to run the operation. Well, at airports that don't have a lot of controllers, that's not so easily done because you really don't have a B group that you can bring in. So what we did at those towers is we reduced the operating hours so that we could handle the traffic basically in one shift. So that might allow us to go with an every other day. It would give us time to clean. It gave us some flexibilities that we needed to keep the towers open. It did result in some reduced operating hours, but we determined that at the towers where we implemented this, that traffic during the nighttime hours at that point in time was sufficiently down that we could safely close the tower. So, as I noted before, we did that at Grand Forks and we did that at Bismarck. We did not do that at Fargo. In Grand Forks, traffic levels increased to a point where we could go back to the extended operating hours in the end of August. And they have been at regular normal operating hours since then. I'm pleased to say that at Bismarck, we will go back to normal operating hours on March 28th. Currently, Bismarck has a man tower from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. It will return to the 6 a.m. to midnight operating hours again at the end of the month. So I'm thrilled to be able to announce that we've been able to do that. There have been instances, I'm not sure so much in North Dakota, but I know we had an airport in Indiana where on occasion there'd be a large cargo flight that came in after the tower was closed, and we'd actually keep the tower open to deal with that one-off flight. But again, really the goal was to give us some flexibility and to avoid a situation where we had to just close the tower down completely because we had levels of exposure that we couldn't control. And with that, I am going to shift over to page 1 of this PowerPoint presentation. And again, I think this is an area where many of you would say, oh, the FAA really hasn't done a very good job supporting me during COVID. And that has been with the construction reimbursable agreements. Dave, if you'd please go to the next page, please. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about just real quickly. What do our technical operations folks do? What activities are the greatest risk if we don't have FAA oversight? The financial impacts, and then just a brief wrap up. Next slide, Dave. So, you know, everybody knows about the air traffic controller portion of the FAA. You guys know our tech ops guys, which most people in the United States do not. But obviously they serve a really, really important role on your airports when there are FAA navigational aids on your facility. And they have a lot of responsibilities, but these are really sort of their main ones. And these are what they are really focused on. You know, a lot of people think that item number 2 is their primary responsibility because that's what they see from day to day, right? They'll go in and they'll say, yeah, you know, we'll accept that. We won't accept it. You need to go do more work. It's actually not their primary function. Their primary function is to minimize the impact of nav aids, and that's both the potential, the positive impact. You want to increase positive impact, but minimize the negative impact of outages of navigational aids on the national airspace system. And typically, the way we do that is when you guys have a construction project, we'll provide a residential engineer if it's under a reimbursable agreement, and they'll conduct a lot of day-to-day oversight. And really, the type of oversight that they provide is what's really in bullets 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'm going to go into all of these a little bit more in detail on the next slide, Dave. So let's talk about minimizing the impact on the NAS. So as I noted, the technical operations group, their primary responsibility is to manage risk at the airport and with the surrounding infrastructure. Here are the 2 FAA orders that the FAA follows. FAA is required to follow its internal orders. Kind of a funny thing about FAA orders, they're not applicable directly to outside parties, but because they are binding on FAA personnel, commitments to those personnel that are in those orders do have spillover effects to all of you as entities that partner with the FAA. So how do they minimize the risk? First of all, they ensure that construction activities don't damage current infrastructure. It's really, really a huge deal. They develop mitigation plans and strategies to avoid that from happening. They ensure that any repairs are made to FAA standards. They protect for various areas on the airport, such as the runway safety area. They also, and not really directly related to their job, are an extra set of eyes to watch out for runway incursions. And they also share common experiences amongst themselves to make sure that we're addressing system-wide problems. Dave? This is what you guys generally know of them doing, which is ensuring that the construction and installation activities meet FAA standards. To that extent, we're sort of the tech ops guys are sort of the owners of the NAS. There might be a little bit of a debate between tech ops and the controllers on that. I'm sure there is. Let's just call them co-owners. But note that the NAVAID portion is really critically important. And, you know, as you all know, if you don't have a system of functioning navigational aids, you're not going to have traffic. It's not just a controller issue. With dozens of advisory circulars, orders, directives, standards, you name it, all kinds of stuff that apply to FAA infrastructure. And they handle such issues as you see here: siting, construction, deviations, are there safety management systems in place, et cetera. Dave? How do we ensure environmental compliance? Well, our tech ops guys don't actually draft the CADXs that you guys are used to seeing. But they are responsible for sort of making sure that we stay in compliance with our assertions. So if we make a determination that there is not going to be a significant adverse environmental impact, they're on site to make sure that in fact is the case. So I can't imagine a circumstance where you would suddenly find a bunch of wetlands that you didn't know about, but you could. You could find some tribal artifacts that you didn't think were there. There are other things that you could find once you sort of start doing the work that was not anticipated. And they're there on the ground and are in a good position to see where that sort of thing is going on. They are also importantly a liaison between the sponsor and the FAA. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Dow. Dow is sort of our person responsible for overseeing reimbursable agreements in North Dakota. Dow does a great job. Dow sits in Fort Worth. She doesn't see what's going on at your airport. So resident engineers do, and they can interact with Dow. And quite importantly, they really can serve as your advocate in a lot of instances because they actually see what's going on. They know what's in the FAA orders. They know sort of what's in the realm of possibility. And they can take that up through their chain of command and determine whether something is possible or not. So I really would encourage you guys to think of them that way instead of it's just someone who's there to tell you no. They coordinate flight procedures with flight standards. They deal with publications, flight checks, coordinating utilities, leases, everything. You guys can read all this stuff for yourself. We also look for targets of opportunity improvements in terms of upgraded equipment, and also can we do some configuration changes that impact not only your airport, but maybe a series of airports. One area we've seen recently where there's some real potential is with the advent of ADS-B. I know North Dakota is basically not under mandatory ADS-B by and large, but to the extent that you're getting pretty good equipage, there may be some advantages there where we can maximize that sort of next-gen technology with more legacy type technology to allow for some advancements. Dave? So here's what I really want to talk about, which are those things that you may have been doing. Quite frankly, this stuff happens pre-COVID all the time, as you'll see as we go through this presentation, but it's been maximized under COVID because we've been unable to provide resident engineers really pretty much anywhere. There are a couple of exceptions, none of which apply to North Dakota, because they, there are some that apply to North Dakota. So if it is a mission critical issue, which you should kind of read as primarily safety, then the FAA has supported those necessary activities throughout COVID. For everything else, we do not send resident engineers into the field unless a couple of things have happened. So first of all, we have to determine that it is a business critical activity. And that's a relatively high bar, but certainly there are airports in North Dakota where that bar could potentially be met. The bigger problem is that even if it's business critical, we do not allow resident engineers to travel to those sites unless some pretty stringent gating criteria are met. We don't have, I believe, any resident engineers who live in North Dakota within a commuting distance of any of the airports. And so that is a problem because the gating criteria really are quite stringent. And I do not believe any place in the Great Lakes region is meeting, I'm sure that they are not meeting those gating criteria. So that has meant that in instances where we have deemed the work on an airport to be mission critical, if we have residential engineers in the local commuting area, we've allowed them to go on site to conduct the requisite level of oversight, as long as the work that was required does not require them to go into the tower or into other buildings where multiple people are going to be. So we were able to restart some activities at O'Hare in early August, which was the soonest we got authority to do that here. And that's because, quite frankly, our residential engineers in Chicago for O'Hare all live in the Chicago area. We had some instances at another Core 30 airport where we had some tech ops guys who do maintenance, and we did not let them go to the airport, even though it was in the local commuting area, because it really wasn't their job. I mean, they were really tasked with just doing maintenance, not for doing resident engineer type oversight. And the position descriptions are not interchangeable. And I know a lot of people think they shouldn't be that hard, but they're actually trained for very, very different functions. And so they don't cross over. So what have we seen more in COVID-19 than we did previously? But, all of these things we see in a non-COVID environment. So even once everything gets back to, however, these things are still going to happen, and this presentation is still relevant. So we see runway incursions. You guys see runway incursions. That's really mostly a function of us being an additional set of eyes on the ground. The bigger things we see are damage to buried cables, power units to utilities because of excavation. We see obstructions that are developed because of construction work that's done. So both to radiated signals and to line of sight. And then we see non-compliance with FAA orders and standards. So next slide, Dave. Excavation. This is our number one problem. And it is a much bigger deal than it seems initially. And the reason why is because our underground cables and infrastructure often support not only the navigational aids on your airport, but to the wider system. So if we take out navigational aids, or because of an excavation problem at Fargo, just to throw that out there, then the impact is not necessarily limited to Fargo. It could spread throughout North Dakota, and everybody would lose that access. That is obviously a very, very big deal. It is also something that is not necessarily intuitive, and it is also something that is just incredibly easy to have happen, because just like we're not on site everywhere all the time, you guys are not on site everywhere all the time. You're right. You let out construction contracts, but the value of having a resident engineer on site is they really should be sort of roaming the site and being really, really on top of what's going on, so that every morning, they should know what's being planned for that day, and they should be troubleshooting to make sure that there isn't any known infrastructure that's likely to be adversely impacted. And then they can tell you as the airport sponsor, you can tell your construction contractors, like, just don't go near this part of the airport without the resident engineer directly on site, eyes on, seeing what's going on. Now, do they see everything? No, you know what? Sometimes they don't. And quite frankly, sometimes there's cables that we don't even know are there. These things happen. So having the RE on site, it's not a guarantee that these kind of problems won't happen. However, even when they do happen, if we have an RE on site, then we have the ability to react immediately. And if we're not on site, things can get much, much worse before we know about it and we're in a position to step in and address the problem. So, Dave, if you could go to the next slide, please. Couple of examples. This did happen during COVID. Did not happen in North Dakota. Did happen in the Great Lakes region. You can see that there is an REIL here that is swooshed. We did not have resident engineers on site for this project because of COVID. The contractor went out and did the work, and they ran over this, which doesn't, it's kind of old equipment. This equipment, in fact, was going to be removed from the airport anyway, and it was going to be set back to our depot. So no harm, no foul, right? Like, what's the big deal? The FAA wasn't going to put it back in once it took it out anyway. Well, here's the thing. As many of you know, we have a lot of nav aids that really are either verging on obsolete or are in fact obsolete, and we cannibalize a lot of those things for parts, or if there's still usable life in them, even if they're not being used at that airport, we'll install them somewhere else. And we have to do that because these things in many instances are no longer being manufactured and there's no way to get replacement parts. Well, this one, once we got it off the airfield and looked at it, this thing's gone. We're not putting it in anywhere else. And so that's a problem, right? That's a real loss of opportunity of something that has become in many respects quite valuable, which is obsolete, but still fully functional navigational aids. Next slide, please, Dave. So here's an instance where we had a bad concrete pour. You can see it's not a good pour. We didn't have a resident engineer on site, I believe. And all this work had to be pulled out. Now, if you catch that right away, it's going to have to be pulled out regardless, right? But if you catch a bad pour early, you can figure out why you've got a bad pour and you can correct your concrete or cement situation before you pour a lot of it. You guys know this stuff is expensive. In this instance, that all had to be ripped out. You can also see here the screw. That's obviously a bad thing. And that bottom picture, they used the wrong flange plates. All of this really requires the FAA to come in, take a look at it, and make sure it meets standards. Because if it doesn't meet standards, it's going to have to be replaced. And you're going to have to pay for that. And sometimes that could be a lot of work. So if you go to the next slide. You know what? I'm going to have you go to the one after this, Dave, and then we'll come back to this one. So there we go. So I'll tell you, I'm going to let you guess which airport this one was. You look at that bottom there, 40 stations required rebuild. So obviously major construction project, obviously a really big airport. And you'll see what they did is the contractor, I don't know why they did this, but they put those extra nuts down there at the bottom. and it made the nave too tall, and it created with a pretty significant runway safety area violation, and we made them redo all 40 of them. So if we'd had an RE on site, we hopefully could have caught this at the first one. We certainly would have caught it before 40 of them went up, and those all had to be done on the airport's dollar, and there was both the cost associated with it and obviously a delay. And it's a relatively time critical project, and the airport had to eat the delay on that because it didn't come to standards, and you know, there wasn't anybody there to catch it. Now, hopefully the airport has enough of its own oversight to catch some of this stuff, but then again, you know, you guys are busy, and it's really not your job to necessarily know the ins and outs of everything that's available for FAA approval. You rely on REs just as much as we do in many respects. And so this was certainly a very unfortunate incident. Dave, could I have you go back 2 slides? Oh, go one more. Sorry about that. All right. And this was an improper installation technique. You can see they tried to pull the cable using a backhoe, and they didn't really monitor the tension. And this was before COVID. We did have an RE on site. They were able to actually, you'll see what they did is they sort of hooked it up to like an Ford 150 or something, Ford F-150 or something. Like it didn't work, and then they hooked them. They just kept going, right? And we looked at it and we were like, nah, that's all got to be replaced. We actually did catch it before the entire system went out, so that was good. But that's what our function is. That's why we're there, is really to provide that level of oversight. Okay, Dave, let's see if the next one I already spoke to or not. I did, so if we can go to the next one. So I want to talk about the impacts on you guys, right? Why should you care? Well, you know, first of all, if you're in the middle of construction and you have to stop and go back and fix something, that can really, really impact the ability of the airport to function as desired, right? If we have NOTAMs up, those NOTAMs might have to be extended. If we have reduced air traffic, that reduction in traffic may have to be maintained until everything can be fixed. It could also adversely affect your flight checks, and the ability for a lot of those nav functions. It's also very expensive, as you guys know. And I'm going to go litigation last, but you can end up with contractor delays, which can be very, very expensive if you end up in an overage, assuming you can even keep the contractor there, depending on what their summer looks like. And then the FAA may refuse to take over the NAVs. And that's really costly, because if that happens, then, you know, not only do we not take over the initial cost of the NAVs, but we won't take over maintenance of it either. And so you bear that. But let's talk a little bit about litigation. So when we first went into COVID, sort of our message to the airports, and it was poorly articulated, was that if you did anything without the RE there, then, you know, the argument was like, well, you accept the risk for that. So well, what does that mean? Well, if it's new construction, it kind of means, well, you accept the potential for delay associated with that construction. So fair enough. I mean, I get that. That's probably pretty good advice, right? If you blow it and we won't accept it, we don't accept it. It's not there. You're going to have to fix it before we accept it. Not really the same issue with pre-existing equipment. Because if it is pre-existing equipment and it goes down and there is an accident, then there will be litigation. And everybody is going to be sued, not just the FAA. And if the FAA comes in and says, we require a resident engineer for that type of work, and this is why we require a resident engineer, and the airport went ahead and did that anyway without a resident engineer, then I don't think you have to have a terribly long conversation with your lawyers about what kind of posture that puts the airport in. So fortunately, aviation accidents don't happen very often. They particularly don't happen terribly often because of failures of the applicable navigational aids, but they always could. It is always a potential. It is a case that no one wants to defend, because particularly if that equipment has not yet been NOTAMed out, because if a pilot believes that there are functioning navigational aids and they're relying on those navigational aids and something adverse happens, it's not the pilot's fault. So it really is an important issue, and it really is one that I think we did not do a great job messaging the distinction between new and pre-existing, but you guys should be aware that going off and just sort of continuing with construction when an RE is required and the FAA cannot support that activity with an RE does put you at real legal risk. So Dave, next slide. So yeah, so that's kind of our conclusion already there, right? Without my even getting to it. No, not really. There are some things that we would like to ask you to do, both during COVID, but also moving forward. And that's as soon as you start planning, please reach out to our planning and requirements group. We are attempting to get REs into the field this summer. Fingers crossed. We do have a backlog. And so the sooner you can let us know what you're planning, the sooner we can get you on the calendar and hopefully be able to support you. I understand that the industry norm nationwide is kind of not to make big commitments until you sort of enter into those construction contracts, which is a very, very short window, to call the FAA and say, hey, we'd really like you here in a couple of weeks. We probably can't support that in summer of 21. I mean, we have a really big backlog. So you guys know Dave, you know Dave's staff, please let them know. Really, any new projects, even looking out 2-3 years in advance, like get us on your calendar or get you on our calendar so that when the time comes for actually doing the construction, we have the resources available to provide the necessary support. So let us know early, let us know often. Work through Dave. He can always reach out to people in tech ops and engineering services who need to be notified. I think Dave and his staff probably are the best first point of contact. And with that, I am going to turn it over to John Mayfield unless anybody has questions for me.
Again, I'm John Mayfield. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for the Great Lakes Region Airports Division. This is our mission, vision, and core values. And what we have going on is the Great Lakes region is supporting the regional management national transition. And what that means is that the associate administrator for airports was Kirk Schaefer, as you all knew. And with the change of administration, he's no longer with us. So Winsome Linford is the acting associate administrator for airports. And our own Sumari Shaw has gone up to be the acting deputy associate administrator for airports, which means that Jim Kiefer is now the acting director of the Great Lakes Airports Division, and I'm the acting deputy director. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about the Reauthorization Act of 2018, Section 163. I'm going to talk about the runway safety area determinations. And I'm going to finish off with some general safety standards branch information. All right, so as we're all aware, back in 2018, the FAA had a reauthorization act, and it was like hundreds of sections, but I wanted to talk about one, and that's section 163. And what section 163 did was it limited the regulation of non-federal sponsored property, and which is a little bit different, because normally what we're talking about is limiting what non-federal entities can do, and what this section actually does, it limits what the federal agency can do as it relates to the non-federal entity. And as you can see, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the four major provisions, A being general limitations, followed by exceptions, rules of construction, and limitations on the airport layout plan approval authority. Now, when you look at Section A states that the FAA may not directly or indirectly regulate the acquisition, use, lease, encumbrance, transfer, or disposal of land by an airport owner or operator. Any facility upon which land or any portion of the land or facility. And so when you look at this, it's like, this is kind of new and it's kind of different. It's saying that we can't limit what you could do with your land. But before you get too excited, just know that there's exceptions. There's always exceptions. So when we look at section B, that's when we start, and C, we're talking about the exceptions in B and the rules of construction in C. And I'm going to put those together. And so what you're looking at here is that with the exceptions, we can't regulate it except if it relates to the safe and efficient operation of aircraft, the safety of people or property on the ground, and we're looking to make sure that the airport receives or pays fair market value for any land. And this also, Section A, doesn't apply to facilities that are acquired or modified using federal funds. It falls under the Surplus Property Act, or uses PSC land or facilities. And of course, nothing affects the existing rules for airport revenue. In Section D, what we're looking at is the airport layout plan, the AOP approval authority. And so at the crux of it, what the question that we're asking is, do we, the FAA, have an approval authority for the project? And so with that, the foundation, when you look at that, when you look at the airport layout plan, and with this rule, we're looking at whether there's a material impact to the safe and efficient operation of aircraft, as I mentioned before. Would it have an adverse effect on the safety of people and property on the ground? And would it affect the value of prior federal investments to a significant degree? Right? If it does, then we, the FAA, maintain statutory authority in making these determinations. And what's notable here is that the foundation of FAA policy on AOPs is derived from Title 49, which requires airport operators to maintain a current AOP that meets certain requirements. So in all this, I'm saying that you should reach out to your ADO for further guidance. So what does this require? This requires a determination. And so what we're going to be looking is for you to get a determination on all projects that you have, whether it's non-aeronautical or aeronautical. So we can look at the determination and we can determine how Section 163 applies. And so when we're looking at that, we're looking for you to make sure that you're depicting your projects on your ALP. We want to look at the project descriptions, the sources of funding, and we're going to look at the analysis that you did when it came to your non-aeronautical development, as well as looking at your Exhibit A, property maps, and deed. Now, status quo. What does this not change? What this doesn't change is it doesn't change the sponsor's obligation as it relates to having airport layout plans. And even if an airport layout plan is not required, other approvals may be required, or it may trigger an environmental determination or other obligations. Also, airspace reviews are required for development, Part 177s and such. And of course, any revenue generated by the use, lease, encumbrance, transfer, or everything else that relates to airport revenue must stay on the airport. And you must maintain your Exhibit A. Now, what can sponsors do? What we would like you to do is to continue to work with your airport district office in Bismarck to determine if Section 163 is applicable to your project. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a determination on all the projects to see if they are applicable or not. And we would like for you to clearly define and document your aeronautical needs on your ALP. And we would ask that you do not start your NEPA until your Section 163 determination has been made. And of course, please work with your ADO on all of this. So remember, this change in the law is going to make it easier in some cases for sponsors to develop portions of your airport for non-aeronautical purposes. Every project should be reviewed, and you should receive fair market value, and all airport revenue needs to stay on the airport. The next thing I need to talk about is the runway safety areas. As many of you know, we had a congressional mandate back in 2000 where we were looking at the runway safety areas for Part 139 runways, and we had till 2015 to get all of those adjudicated and worked out, which we did. And so now what we're doing is we're coming back to look at the non-Part 139 runways for runway safety areas. However, what I don't want to do is just assume that everyone has been around that long. So I'm going to take a minute to kind of backtrack and discuss the runway safety area. And as you can see here, this is a runway safety area depicted. Now, the runway safety area is capable of supporting aircraft under dry conditions without causing structural damage to the aircraft or injury to the occupants. What you're looking at with an RSA is to enhance the safety of aircraft if they overshoot, overrun, or veer off of the runway on either side. And it can provide a structure for firefighting equipment and the rescue equipment to go off into the incident in case you do have one. Now, the FAA is not, this is not one of those situations where it's all or nothing. And as such, the FAA recognizes that incremental improvements inside the full RSA determinations can enhance margins of safety. So what we're looking at is we would like for you to have your full RSA be totally safe and everything totally addressed in there, but we recognize that's not always possible. So what we're looking for is different margins of safety and getting different pieces as we can. And so towards that, the airport owner and the FAA must continually analyze with respect to operational, environmental, and technological changes. And so what we're saying is it's not where you're going to go in and you're going to get your RSA once and then you're going to be done. You're always going to have situations that may come up and make different technologies that come up to help, like EMAS, the engineering mass aircraft system, or anything like that that's going to help, increase the level of safety. So we're always looking at sort of those sorts of things. And we're always looking at continuous improvement in the RSA category. So it's not where you got to get it one time and then you're just done. We should be looking at this continually through the planning process. Also, when you're looking at improvements, we want to do what we're looking to do, if we're looking to do the determination based on where you are right now, a snapshot in time, and we're going to evaluate it to see how practical it is for us to do certain things to enhance your level of safety. Now, the objective of the program is that all federally obligated airports, including Part 139 airports, come within the standards of the AC, which is right here, 5300-13 airport design to the extent practicable. So how do we do this? What we do is we start out with a RSA inventory. So each regional airports division collects and maintains data on each runway that's at a federally obligated airport. We look at the data, we look at the width and the length and all of the applicable issues that we have in each one, and we document it, and then we apply the standard for each one to see where our issues are. And in addition, we're gonna look at all the obstacles, and once we document those, we're gonna look and see what we could do to kind of fix those or remove them. And so when you look at your determinations, which come right after the inventories, what we're going to do is once we collect the data and we look at it, it's going to be either one of 4 determinations made. Either you meet all the current standards, or 2, you don't meet the current standards, but you're practicable to improve the RSA so that it will meet, or your existing RSA can be improved, but it won't meet the total standard, or it doesn't meet and it's not practical to improve the standard. So these are the 4 options, as you can see in here. So why do you need to know this? What we're going to be doing is Great Lakes is going to start conducting runway safety area determinations for the non-Part 139 runways that we hadn't looked at prior to. And we're going to be looking for the non-compliant classified NIPIAS general aviation airports. And so we're going to start off with 10%. And so your ADO should be reaching out to some of the airports out there that we're starting with, and we're going to be working our way to get into all of them over a period of time. And the RSA inventory determinations should be completed in accordance with FAA Order 5200-8, paragraph 9. And as you can see in here, what you're normally looking at is the master planning process, but is also triggered by your runway construction, whether there's a reconstruction or a significant expansion that involves federal funds. Now, moving on. Just a couple of safety standards and branch management items for you. As you all know, Burke Rhodes moved on and he is now part of headquarters Safety and Standards Branch 300 up in headquarters. And we have a brand new 620 Safety and Standards Branch Manager. It's Stinson Stager, and he's coming to us from the Southwest region. And he's been on board for a few months now. And so he's kind of got his feet wet and he is fully up and running. And so if you have needs, you can just reach out to him. And he wanted me to pass on a couple of things to you. The first one is on e-documentation. So the Safety and Standards Branch have completed 80 e-documentation inspections since May of 2021, and their process is continuing. However, even with that, they're starting to resume in-person inspections using a risk-based approach. They have scheduled 79 on-site inspections for the remainder of current year 21. And the certification inspectors will reach out to each airport prior to coming on site. And these are the areas that they're going to focus on. Also, in the realm of safety management system, the FAA Order 52-11 is under final review from the FAA headquarters. So that way, that should be coming out soon. And we're going to 620 is going to be looking at full-scale exercises soon. And if you have one due in 2021, you should hear from your cert inspector. And if you have any concerns or possible mitigations efforts going on, we just ask that you reach out to your cert inspector. Finally, please send us your photos. We like to see how the federal funds are in action. And so if you have projects, especially completed ones, please send them on to your ADO and let us know of any ribbon cutting, grand opening, or groundbreaking. Now I'll take any questions at this time.
All right, sir. I did not have any questions for you at this moment.
All right. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Lindsay Butler.
So thanks everybody. As you heard from Rebecca and John, FAA has quite a lot going on right now. We are working through some staff changes, not just at the region, it's also within the airport's district office. I'll talk about the appropriation and authorization. FAA, money, which is probably what everybody wants to hear about. A little bit about the grant process, life cycle, and closeouts, and then Dave will get into some North Dakota at a glance specifics. So first of all, some temporary changes at our ADO.
used to dabble in North Dakota in a previous role as a regional environmental specialist. So some of you may recognize names and wonder why I'm giving you this presentation. Andy Peak, the manager of the Dakota, Minnesota Airports District Office, has stepped into a temporary detail with Tech Ops as the district manager, overseeing a large portion of the Great Lakes states for Tech Ops. And we are, Dave and I will be splitting acting manager while Andy will be gone. So I am currently the acting manager of the Dakota, Minnesota Airports District Office until May 14th. And then Dave will take over in May through the end of August. And hopefully Andy will be back at that time. Addition to the staff changes for Dave, Andy, and I, we have a new program analyst starting. She started with us last year when Janelle Stocking retired. We have a new program, AJ Ornelius. We have a new program manager, Kyle Sebesta. He started with us about a month ago and comes to us from North Dakota from a consulting firm. So some of you may recognize Kyle's name. And starting on Monday, we will have a new program analyst starting in our Minnesota office of the Dakota, Minnesota Airports District Office, Mirinda Gargenti. So lots and lots of new changes and faces. It's really great to be able to fulfill these roles in our current telework environment. So switching gears to what the FAA is operating under, we currently are operating under our authorization, which allows us to and authorizes our full budget for $3.35 billion in AIP from October 2018 through September 30th of 2023. Secondly, we have an appropriation that was signed into law by the president in December of 2020, which gave us our money, and that is our annual budget expiring September 30th of 2021. A little bit of information of why we have two bills and what they mean and why they're different. Our authorization is basically the permission to collect money. It usually gives us the permission to spend that money, but there is no money associated with an authorization in general. It is a multi-year bill. This is the first time the FAA in a long time has had actually a 5-year bill, which is really great because it allows us to continuously have the ticket tax and keep the money flowing into the Airport and Aviation Trust Fund. That, I said, is a multi-year bill, which goes through the end of 2023. Our appropriation is actually the money. It's the money that allows us to do what we need to do under the authorization. So if you think about it in two ways, the authorization is the permission and the appropriation is the money to do those, to follow through on those permissions. They are annual, and each year we need a new appropriation bill in order to run our grant program. So why is that important, and why do we always have to kind of talk in terms of timing? You know, a lot of what you all are experiencing with waiting for your grants is due to appropriations, authorizations, and when our program is fully funded. If you can see, 2020, I did not put on this slide because 2020 was a very strange anomaly in many ways. But as you can see, we have not had a program signed into law in December or January since back in 2015, and then all the way back in 2006. It takes a long time when you have a full year appropriation to actually get out our program. So when we're pushing a full year of appropriation, it gets condensed when our appropriation doesn't get funded in the time that we would love it. Even if you look all the way back to 2006, we have never had an appropriation in October. So We all push for pre-applications. We all push for getting our pre-work done for grants, and it's a lot of hurry up and wait. So this year, we actually do have money sooner than we've had in years past, which is a great thing. We're all very happy about that. And in the law of unintended consequences, it means that we're pushing all of you, consultants and airports, to get us things sooner rather than later. We heard the battle cry of we need money, we need more money, and we need more money faster. So Congress and Office of Secretary of Transportation and headquarters has been working very diligently to hear that and to push out our program faster so that we can hopefully take advantage of summer construction seasons, up in the northern tier states, which we all are. I still have snow outside of my window. I know Bismarck was lucky enough to reach the 60s last week. Dave said he went on multiple bike rides, so a little bit jealous over here in Minnesota. We still have some snow on the ground. With all that being said, we currently have 7 active grant programs. They're listed on here on the screen. We have our regular old AIP, which now seems not as shiny and magical as it once seemed. We have supplemental appropriations for FY18, FY19, FY20, FY21. And we have CARES Act from in 2020, and now we have a new grant program, the Corona Recovery and Relief Stimulus Act and the Airport's Corona Relief Grant Program. So if you are all confused by 7 grant programs, so are we. I'm going to try and unpack them and hopefully help everybody understand. We'll start with our most basic that we've all been kind of accustomed to. The 2021 Airport Improvement Program grant program. Very important to not lose sight of the shiny, flashy new money and keep the entitlements, state apportionment, and discretionary projects moving forward. AIP this year has regular local match at a 90-10 split, or whichever your airport category falls into. The Federal Register notice for AIP is out and believe went out to all of you. March 15th is the date for sponsors to tell us that you plan on taking a federal 21 grant. That is for the use of your entitlements. May 3rd is that we request a final grant application to be based on bids for entitlement grants. If you're in the process of receiving a larger federal ask, either state apportionment or discretionary, we will work with you, but we're really trying to achieve all grant applications by May 3rd. Again, we will be issuing the grants using the e-grant system, just like we did last year. So you'll receive your grants through the e-grant system and your certifications as well. CARES Act. I think all of you are very well aware of the CARES Act that was signed last year on March 27th, 2020, that provided $10 million in funding for economic relief for the COVID-19 pandemic. CARES Act also provided a federal share to up to 100% for matching for AIP and supplemental funds. And I believe a number of you have already utilized your CARES Act funding in the state of North Dakota. The new Corona Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act, also known as CRRSA or CRRSA, however you wish to say that acronym, CRRSA, was signed into law by the President on December 27th, 2020. This is our newest coronavirus recovery grant program. It provides $2 billion in funds to help with the public health emergency. With the Coronavirus Recovery Act, we've establish an airport coronavirus response grant program to help us award those grants. With the new program, all airports must apply for their grants by June 30th of 2020. Dave sent out the email requesting you all to submit your SF424 and get that back to the ADO by June 30th. This is 1 year money, not to spend it in 1 year, but to obligate it in 1 year. So all the grant funds need to be under grant by September 30th of 2021. You will have the normal 4-year period of performance to spend that money. But if we do not have it under grant by then, it goes back to the trust fund. The grants that are provided for the coronavirus response grant program are at 100%. However, this new grant program does not provide 100% matching share for AIP or supplemental grants. So while the new coronavirus grants provide 100% funding for the help to prevention and spread of coronavirus, it did not come with matching share money in this current bill. So how do I actually get a grant and what does it mean? All of the grant steps are fundamentally the same. Even though we have 7 grant programs actively going on at the same time, there are steps that we require, making sure that you can fulfill each of the grant requirements, and that's best to work with your program manager within the ADO and or Dave, and we can help you through the process. There are pre-grant actions, there's the grant programming, and then there's the grant application, offer, and acceptance, which comes through our e-grant system. There's the ADO grant oversight, making sure you're being fiscally responsible with your grant payments, and then grant closeouts. All of those steps are equally important within the life cycle of the grant. So throughout the process of the grant, you as the recipient need to be responsible for staying off the FAA's naughty list. And how you do that is making sure that you're submitting your quarterly reports, making sure that you provide a first drawdown and regular drawdowns. That is very important when we as an agency or you all submit requests for more funding. Every year, there's delegations through Congress that always ask, well, what would FAA do with more money? That's why we have some of the supplemental programs that we have. That's why we've been given additional funds over and above our appropriation. But the second question that comes down is, how is FAA using the money that they currently have under grant? So it's very important when you are issued a grant, and we'll just say it was issued in July of 2020, you should have already done your grant drawdown. You should be doing some sort of grant drawdown, the first one within 6 months of the grant award, and then regular drawdowns to show that there is activity on that money, making that money work for us. It's really challenging for us to stand and say, sure, we need more money, when the bank account is still very full with with money that has yet to be spent. So we all need to be better and more diligent about doing our regular drawdowns. And then reaching 10% or 2.5% when you've spent the majority of your grant and you want to, you're working through a draft closeout, or you're working on final documentation to close out your grant. A lot of times the grants sit at a 10% withholding for a significantly long time. And that's when they get on an inactive list, or we start like harassing you to make sure that you're making that last 10% move with a draft closeout submitted to our office, or doing some sort of activity that shows that the grant hasn't just gone stale. This year in November, or this fiscal year, November 12th of 2020, the 2 CFR 200 legislation was changed and has significantly identified and solidified a lot more of our timeframes for grant closeouts. So we need to make sure that when the period of performance, the POP starts and the POP ends, we have a very small window of time to work through that closeout. Oftentimes, we spend a lot of the 4 years when the grant was actually issued. Some of the work may have been done over 1 construction season or 2 construction seasons, and then it sits. The period of performance is going to be becoming increasingly important, and it could result in grants being unilaterally closed, no additional funds after the period of performance expires. So we all need to work together to make sure that when we open grants that we are fiscally responsible to closing them. We have a number of resources on our website to help you through the closeout. The FAA Office of Airports issued a standard operating procedure, which has a grant closeout worksheet. We have a grant closeout documentation review checklist, and a final project report with tracking sheets. All of those are available for your use on our website. And please make sure that you reference the Airport Improvement Program Handbook, Chapter 5, Section 8, and this closeout SOP number 10. Both of those are helpful tools for you for closeouts. And that is my section of the presentation. Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All righty, thanks, Lindsay. So let's click to the next slide. First of all, I'd like to just say I hope everybody is healthy and safe and doing well in this time. So, it's a struggle to get through some of these times. So hope everybody's doing well. So I thought I'd just kind of jump through what happened in the last year. We'll go back to last March. So last March, here we are, we're in Minot, we're at the North Dakota Conference, everything, things are starting to turn up a little bit. The next week 2 of March, went to South Dakota for the airport conference. Things are ratcheting up a little bit more, and the seriousness is coming out. Week 3, I get an urgent message from my daughter's college saying they are closing down and going online. So week 3 popped up an emergency trip to Arizona to pick up my daughter and move her home. Week 4, we started working from home in the FAA, and here we are 1 year later, and we are in the same situation. We are currently working from home. Right now, I go to the office about every couple of weeks, check the mail, start the car, make sure everything works in the office. But by and large, everybody is working from home. So interesting times. Next slide, Lindsay. So grants in 2020, we'll just roll through this pretty quick. Funding in North Dakota. We went through our AIP program. We got roughly $57.5 million in all funds that go with grants. So entitlement, state apportionment, discretionary, and CARES match. It was pretty unique in 2020 with CARES match. 23.5 roughly in discretionary money. Some good projects last year. Looks like some more good projects moving into 2021 also. And 4.6 million in CARES match funds. So it was kind of a big relief there to move forward with 100% grants, 90% AIP, 10% CARES match. Some of those particular funds, like if you selected a multi-year grant, moving into the 2021 funds, there is not going to be match currently for those funds. So the grants in 2020 for that particular pot of money had the match. Multi-year into 21, no match currently. And it was a very successful year with grants and discretionary, a very busy year. Next slide, Lindsay. So where did it all go? So this is a graph roughly of where the grant money went. So 44% to runways, 6% to taxiways, aprons got 12%, some buildings and others, somewhere around that 38%. So as you can see, the majority of funds are going to pavements to keep airports in good operating conditions. So that's a good number, 61% overall to pavements, airside pavements. So we like to see that trend, keeping the runways in good condition, keeping everything operational. Next slide, Lindsay. Okay, grants in 2020 continued. We had supplemental grants around 30.8 million. So CARES grants were only able, the CARES match, excuse me, was only available on the 2020 supplemental funds. Below we have a list of who received grants in 2020, but had varying years of supplemental funds. So Fargo had a cargo apron. They used their 2018 supplemental money. Hillsborough was brought up, I think, earlier in the state's presentation on constructing a parallel taxiway. Watford City, constructing a new runway, new alignment, runway extension, big project. The 2019 supplemental funds, Mohall got a grant in 2020 fiscal year for runway extension, rehabilitation, and widening. And Dickinson got a 2020 supplemental grant, so they were able to take advantage of the CARES match in that. And that is just a phase of their reconstruction runway in a new location. So good projects there. So next slide. We also, as Lindsay mentioned earlier, in March, got notification of the CARES grants. This kind of put our operation in overdrive. The FAA came up with a process to automate and send out grant applications. So that was pretty handy. It helped us out a lot, helped you out a lot, not having to fill out grant applications, just sign them and return them. For the most part, you know, they're being used. There's a couple out there that still have to use some of their money, but it's going out there and it's going to work. So that's good. General aviation airports got between 20 and 30,000, and then the air carrier airports, their funding was based off of a formula put together in the FAA. This money, of course, is for operations and maintenance. Maintenance can include pavements. So if you're looking at some crack seals, some remarking, that type of work, is good use of CARES funds. It's maintaining the airport. Another one is snow removal equipment. A lot of people are opting to purchase some snow removal equipment with that. Along with the snow removal equipment, we also will talk a little bit about Buy American in upcoming slides, but that's a requirement of the CARES grants. Other things it's being used for is electrical bills, insurance, staff salaries. It's got a well-rounded use. There is also the ability to convert some of these funds into projects. We've talked to all the airports about that, that have enough money to really do a project, and there'll be more information coming on that as time goes on. But That is an option with CARES Act. Also, to put the website on there, there's some frequently asked questions and a list of grants. Along with that, if you're struggling trying to get your question answered, let us know. We will either know it or we will find somebody who does know it. So there's a lot of complicated questions that go along with this that we kind of weed through along the way, just trying to educate as we go. So next slide, please. So then for 2021, the funding is flowing fast. We've talked about this to a lot of people. Lindsay mentioned it. Our discretionary money, it's coming early. Be prepared because the money is flowing. One thing that we are still struggling with a little bit is we have some studies and reports to go along with environmental determinations that have not been submitted yet. Without the environmental determination, we cannot start our process internally to program and send it forward. So that May 3rd date is coming fast. Start looking at those, and if you're going to fall behind, let us know. It's a pretty hard date. We have some flexibility, but not much. But let us know if you're not going to be able to get those reports and everything done in time. We can carry over your money and we can get back to your project in 2022. Next slide, please. Closeouts. So we've had 23 closeouts in North Dakota submitted so far this year. 2017 projects must be closed this year. If they're not, we get into that period of performance that Lindsay was talking about. And while it's not as strict as the grants going out this year, there still comes a whole bunch of reporting responsibilities if we do not get that grant closed in this year. So if the grant doesn't get closed, we also have to do an amendment to extend the period of performance. So there's just a handful of them out there. So we have 5 closeouts total, and we have 2 in the office. So program managers will be reaching out to you to round up those additional 2017 closeouts, and along with any other closeouts that are ready. I mean, we'll take closeouts as they come. We're busy trying to catch up and process some of these, so keep them coming. We like closeouts. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about Buy American. A couple years ago, the process started changing. Before, we would get Buy American waiver requests in-house, and we would review them and process them. A couple years ago, a website was developed and a more formal process started for getting Buy American approvals. So we'll walk through just a couple things here. We need to have the percent worksheet completed for and the final assembly questionnaire. Some of those are coming in a little vague, so we need to have those filled out. Another thing that we need to move towards is a lot of the vendors want their information to be kept secret. So proprietary information, and this is when it comes to buying equipment, should be forwarded right to our office. So work with the low bidder to submit that directly to us, and we'll get it reviewed. Along the way, we can revoke waivers, request additional information, and that's something we're doing a lot of right now. We're reviewing deep and requesting additional information. I can't remember exactly, but I think the group meets in headquarters a couple times a month to publish the information we post. Forms to us. Next slide, please. I kind of touched on some of the the assembly stuff, but once all that is submitted and it goes through our system, it comes out with an approval, and we will notify the sponsor in the case of building construction or something similar, or we'll notify the manufacturer and the sponsor separately to let them know that the waiver was approved. They get posted on a web. There's a Buy American website out there that I'm sure a few of you are familiar with. So make sure you go out there and take a look. Once it's posted onto our web, they're out there for 10 days for public comment period. On the 11th day, it becomes effective and can be used for the AIP project. Next slide. So just a couple things we've been seeing. This is kind of how we want it to look. Pretty clear descriptions of U.S. and non-U.S. merchandise. What we've been seeing a lot of is part numbers missing. They'll put an NA or leave it blank. And because of the review and the public website, we need to have that information available so that we have complete submittals. The vague descriptions I mentioned earlier, there's a little bit of information that we absolutely need to complete these, and they're coming in with not enough information. Another issue we've been having is the math doesn't add up. You kind of add up a couple different areas and you come up with different answers. So, something to catch along the way is the math right? And sometimes we're seeing items added to meet the Buy American percentage that are not allowed. So cases of a cost for a warranty or a delivery cost or anything like that, those items are not allowed in meeting your U.S. content. So just keep on working on those and brushing those up, because we want to make sure that we're getting the product we've asked for. Jump to the next slide. And with that, I got just a couple of small items. First of all, Sandy DeFati is going to be retiring this year. So something we're transitioning to internally here is Brian Shook is going to be transitioning into the planning role for North and South Dakota. So as Sandy's year moves on and she gets ready to depart, Brian will be up to speed. Like the state had mentioned earlier in some of their presentations, we do miss talking to you. We do enjoy the phone calls and the Zooms and other meeting websites that we use. So, but we do miss seeing you. So hopefully soon we'll be able to get out there and see everybody, and hopefully we can get on the road. With that, I don't have much more. We will just let you know that if you need to contact me, if you're having trouble getting a hold of us, email is the best communication. And if you're not getting anything, let me know. My cell phone number is 701-400-4162. Please reach out to me if you need anything. And with that, I will turn it over to AJ. As mentioned earlier, AJ started in our office in August of last year. She took over a role that Janelle had. So we're happy to have AJ on board. AJ comes to us with a little bit of aviation education background too. So she is active in the STEM program. So I will turn it over to AJ to take it from here.
So what I wanted to talk to you today was about the STEM aviation program, which is the STEM and AvSed that I'm working on with the Bismarck ADO office. So we have a couple of programs that are available. There is an annual event that is an Airports Design Challenge, which is offered for students through grade levels K through 12. It's offered every September. And the challenge this past year had approximately 1,500 students from several different foreign countries, as well as students throughout the United States. And what they would do is choose a rural or a major airport or international airport, and then they would actually go in and redesign it. It was a very lengthy process. It was about a 6-month program. And it was very fun. I was also a mentor in that program to help with additional students. The other thing that is coming up is there's going to be a career day being held on April 29th. So if you have any students or know of anybody that would like to attend, it's with the Aviation Safety Program. So there'll be a lot of different individuals within that line of business, including aviation safety inspectors, as well as other STEM representatives that are going to be doing that outreach to talk to students. And the other part of the STEM program are 2 grants that we have for the workforce. We have one geared for future pilots, as well as for future mechanics. Again, this was my presentation. Sorry, I'm starting backwards a little bit. The STEM program are a strategic partnership with government organizations at all levels. We work well with key stakeholders in industry and academia and build relationships aimed at reaching our target audience, students with or without prior aviation experience. So we are working at evolving the STEM AVSED program, not only just on a local, but throughout the United States. So I am your STEM AVSED representative covering also South Dakota as well as North Dakota. These are some of our goals: pipelines and pathways to aerospace careers, STEM education for every student, strategic partnerships to maximize these benefits. And we are working in collaboration with cross agencies to optimize our STEM AVSED program. So not only are we evolving as a program across the lines of business, which I am with the Office of Airports, we are working with Flight Standards District Office and other lines of business within the FAA. We will also be working with additional federal agencies. This is a brief slide on the Airport Design Challenge that we had last year.
FAA, and this is Blair with the FAA. Do you know what the FAA actually stands for? Federal Aviation Administration. Set the rules, make sure everybody's safe, and when planes are flying, you can't have everybody crisscrossing. You need to line them up in one highway in the sky.
All roads kind of lead to an airport, because an airport is where it all begins. We've got to have a place to safely take off and land aircraft. And what we want to be able to do is help you understand more about what's happening on that airport. We want to do that using the virtual world of Minecraft. And what we want to do is introduce a challenge to you on a weekly basis to help you learn about different parts of an airport and recreate it completely in the world of Minecraft.
A real life construction site.
That's right.
That's what you're doing.
Non-stop living and growing and breathing development. So here's what you can look forward to. On a weekly basis, we'll provide video instruction and internet links to help you learn about every component of an airport.
We're going to go for 5 weeks. And at the end, you will have designed your own airport. If you're interested, come on and sign up.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, hello, this is Brian Shook. Dave mentioned earlier that I will be taking over for Sandy. I, in the past, have worked with North Dakota. In fact, the majority of my career I've been a program manager for every NIPIAS airport in North Dakota, with the exception of Bismarck, oddly enough. So I will be back in North Dakota again. I'll also be doing work in South Dakota too. So I'm looking forward to meeting up with people I haven't had a chance to talk with recently. Just to quick give you updates on my family. I know some of you have known me for years and know about me, and I just wanted to mention that my son went into the I took him in because he wasn't feeling well. So he, we were concerned he had COVID, so they took some tests and he was clear of COVID, but he did need some antibiotics. And we were going down the list of things, and the doctor asked, are there any allergies we need to be concerned about? And my boy looked at me sheepishly and went over to the doctor and whispered something in his ear. I didn't know what that was all about. And later he didn't tell me why, but we picked up the medication and I noticed the note on it. It said, do not take with broccoli. So I think there might be a correlation there. Anyway, I'm glad to be back in North Dakota again. I'm looking forward to meeting everybody again and continuing on with our mission. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty, looks like AJ is still having some technical difficulty there, and I think she was pretty close to wrapping up her presentation. So with that, we're a little early, but I don't see any questions in the chat box. So we'll turn it back over.